Okay, so for this video, we're going to look at how do I actually begin and start to shade that sphere. You've seen in Canvas the example of what you're going to be doing. Here's an example of what I'm drawing from. So if you can find a white ball or actually it doesn't matter what color it is to work off of, that is better than just working with the sample in Canvas. Make sure you've sharpened your pencil and you've got your pencil sharpener handy, you've got an eraser handy. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna begin by just sketching out that circle. Just a quick suggestion with that actually. When you're starting to sketch a circle, what I like to do is just kind of move my arm as much as possible in a circular motion like this. And I just keep tracing it until I sort of find the place that this starts to really look like the circle shape that I want, because I'm starting with the idea of drawing a shape, right? I'm drawing that shape on my paper to get the circle going, and then I'm gonna shade this circle to look like the form that it is I'm actually trying to capture. So I get as close as I can to that circle shape. If I'm a little off, what I like to do is sometimes I'll look at it, I'm just gonna turn my paper a little bit. Like this looks a little bit shoved out and kind of like an egg, like I yanked it out a little bit too far there, so I might make that adjustment there. And I just play with it until it really starts to look as circular as I can get it. I would rather have you have a wonky circle shape that's close enough than you tracing something, because you're not learning from tracing. You already know how to trace. So just give it a whirl, try it out. Here's my sample that I've sketched out already. Is it perfect? Perfect? No, not exactly. Like here, now that I'm re-looking at this sketch, like it looks a little flat-sided right here. Right? So maybe I just want to bring this out just a little bit more and see what that might look like if it kind of comes out a little bit more there. So you can just play with that shape until you get it to where it's as close as you can get it, where it's looking pretty good, but not perfect. So no one expects you to draw a perfect circle, and that idea that you should be, I find ridiculous. So there you go. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to consider, where is my light source coming? So the way that this sphere is positioned in front of me right now, off camera for you guys, the light source is kind of hitting it from here. And so that means my highlight, the lightest area on this form, is right here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to squint with my eyes. I'm going to kind of close them halfway. And I'm going to try to find the darkest spot of shadow for this sphere, and that is where I'm going to start to shade. You'll notice that my pencil lines for this sphere are pretty light. They're not too dark, so I can easily build up kind of what I'll call a medium amount of graphite on the paper and get rid of that line edge, because remember, the goal with shading and making things look realistic is to have the lines and edges of objects, the lines that are defining the object, disappear, and have the shading, the values that you create, that's what actually defines those forms on your piece of paper. Forms being, they're really just the shapes that you're shading in, right? But I want it to look like a form. Really make sure to get rid of those, if you are doing some erasing, get rid of those little eraser boogers. You can blow them away, like I'm doing, but you don't want to smudge your pencil too much with your fingers. So you notice I was a little bit careful about that. So what I'm going to do is just keep going with this base layer of graphite. But now that I've started putting a deeper shadow, kind of bringing this out, like a deeper value, I should say, to this cast shadow area, I'm going to move into the sphere, and then you're going to see I have another sample worked out. You're going to see in a second. But this is our cast shadow area, again, where it's my darkest. I'm not going to bring this really to the darkest value in general. Maybe I'll put just a little pop right here where I'm going a little bit more on my pencil point and I'm laying down a bit more graphite, just to really establish really truly the darkest area for the whole drawing. So the rest of the drawing will not get hopefully quite as dark as right in here. Then I'm going to look at, in my sphere, as I see it sitting in front of me, then I have kind of the shadow. So this is cast shadow, which is always on the ground, and usually one of your darker areas. That I have a shadow that's happening up the side and kind of along the bottom of my sphere. It's on the sphere itself. Because the light from this room, the way it's hitting the object, it's almost coming from the back side of it, not the front side that's facing me. So I'm just, but again, you'll notice that I put down kind of a medium layer of graphite. I'm not really going in super heavy right away because I want to give myself the choice to, you know, leave it alone where it's at right now in terms of the value I'm establishing, or maybe I could go back in and put another layer of pencil, but I don't want to get it so dark right away that I can't walk back from it and it becomes an oops, like, oh crap, I made that area way too dark and now I can't walk back from it and it's kind of screwing up my drawing. So be really careful about that. So you'll see how quickly I'm kind of moving across this. I'm just going to keep filling this in a bit just for you to get a rough idea. But what's interesting, what's starting to happen as I look closely at this sphere as it's sitting on the table is actually the cast shadow over here starts to really become a lesser value. So it's lightening up. And then over here on the actual sphere itself, it actually is a darker value than the cast shadow sitting kind of on the ground below it. So there's actually like a transition that happens where you have this dark pop on the ground kind of sitting in the cast shadow that's really right underneath the sphere where it's sitting on the ground. And then there's this transition area where actually the shadow on the object itself becomes the greater value, the darker value, than what's happening on the table below it in that area over here. So there's kind of this flip-flop that happens. So I'm going to move now to the second sketch that I've worked up, so you don't have to sit there watching me shade the whole thing. And I want to get more into the mid-tone area. So for this, I have defined, you know, this cast shadow. I've got my dark pop that's happening right here. Maybe I want to add a bit more of a layer, you know, down in this area. But generally speaking, this is looking pretty good. I'll work this transition. Notice how I've fuzzed out the edge of the shadow. Shadows generally, unless it's a really harsh shadow, have fuzzy edges. So I tried to not have the edge be too harsh. And, you know, if you can still see this line of the original shadow and where I fuzzed it out, like maybe I want to kind of gradually transition that a bit more with a bit more pencil work. So I want you to start to think about shading in layers than just you immediately kind of lay down your one layer and you're done. That is not the best way to shade, actually. You want to kind of lay down these thin layers and keep working on top. But I've got these kind of like, you know, my darkest dark sitting in that cast shadow, kind of the dark area and the shadow on the form itself. Now I need to get into the midtones. So this is where I'm going to be more careful with my pencil and just kind of like come in and say, well, you know, I'm going to work those circle strokes and kind of be a bit gentle, you know, but still laying down a decent amount of pencil. Start to transition that. Sometimes when I make my first contact with the pencil and the paper, it gets a bit rough, and then as I'm able to work more on it, I can lighten that pencil stroke as I go. And I do see a bit of a shadow, or what we would call a midtone, kind of working up the side of the sphere, up this way. So I'm going to start to bring this up on both sides, kind of work that transition a bit, and I'm speeding up how fast I'm shading for your guys' purposes. When I was shading this for myself, for you guys to just see the next stage, I took a bit longer than this. I was not moving this quickly with my pencil. So think of this like a time lapse, like I'm just speeding it up to kind of start to complete this a bit more for you guys. So as I come in here, this is where I noticed you guys, some of you having the temptation to smudge. Please do not. Just do your best with this, with raw pencil. So if it ends up being a little scratchy or you see your strokes and you end up making it maybe a little bit darker in some places than you meant to, I would rather have that happen than you smudge it, because smudging just can look really messy and muddy, and then you can also lose the white area. So this area I want to start to leave white. So I might have a very, very thin amount of pencil that kind of comes along and defines that edge. But you have two choices now with how you can resolve this, meaning that it really is fading into almost pure white. I can try to kind of continue this up and just have it fade to nothing like this. And I can actually go in and decide to lift some of my pencil very carefully, or I can erase out that line, and your eye will kind of want to complete that. But if you don't like the way that looks, another technique that people use is they actually make the choice to define that edge where the highlight is, where it really is truly there's really no value, right? It's like it's white and you should leave your paper alone. You actually can shade the background a bit. So what you do is you start to lay down a bit of, and I wouldn't make this super dark, but you kind of defined the background with a little bit of shading and a shadow back there, okay? So, and then you can have this kind of come around and you can kind of lose it. You know, you can make it into, it doesn't have to be such an abrupt stop. You can kind of like fade it like that. This might look funny to you at first, but this is actually a technique a lot of artists use for realism, where it starts to give the almost that background layer some presence. But this is a way to bring this area forward in the drawing and have it seem like it's popping out at us, and send that background to truly the background and have it be more realistic. So those are two choices with how you would handle that in terms of, you know, what happens with this, the idea of realism. What I want you to really avoid is this. I don't want to see your guys' really dark outline of your shape that you draw when you're first getting going, and then I still see that. That's a no-no, because that makes this look like a drawing, right? It looks like a drawing when I see the evidence of the line, and then it's sort of filled in with value.